Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this week's episode of the User-Centered Podcast. This week, we'll be talking about the psychology of usability. Enjoy! The ongoing task of understanding user choices and object interactions leads discourse into the realm of psychology and context. Throughout each of this week's readings, psychological aspects are studied in terms of constraints, perceptions, and how cultural context plays into user design. Moreover, I found how increasingly relatable these theories connect to everyday user interactions, as well as tasks I face in the technical writing industry. Each of these readings illuminated my current understanding of usability, changing the way I see rhetorical situations in general. James Greenough, in Gibson's Affordances, lays out the emerging perspective of situational theory, relating to the perception of a context and a user. When a designer is beginning their user research phase, Gibson's theory argues that motion should be taken into an account. A rhetorical context is not stagnant, even though it is easy to fall into that line of thought. One should understand the user and the context from perceiving the unique qualities present, witnessing their interconnectivity from one moment to the next. This method differs from simply relying on our past user knowledge. In a way, this relates back to our conversations on the average user. The fault of creating an average user is how it does not take into account the uniqueness and fluctuating actions of the user. Including the aspect of motion into user research places improvement at the center of learning. As we even observe someone logging into their email and sending a message, the motion of the context explains a large element of the action. If it was broken down into just singular steps, such as logging in, finding the new message button, using the keyboard, writing the message, and then sending it, the act as a whole would not properly be understood. The more I learn about usability and design observation, the more I see the importance of the in-between moments, if you could call them that. The moments in flux where the user is deciding their next option and reacting to the constraints the interface has prompted them. Moreover, Greenough relates that this in-motion perspective is connected to the realm of linguistics as well. Personally, I found this section extremely interesting, especially how it points to language as a tool for user experience. Greenough mentions situational theory, showing how sentences act as a bridge between situations. Usability research can be looked at in this same way, looking at the way functionalities are bridged in interfaces. Likewise, in connection to the psychology of usability and situational theory, constraints play an important role in leading users to their desired goal. Conditions and constraints have a negative sounding implication, but their role is quite the contrary. As Greenough states, conditions are outcomes that are needed or desirable for a broader activity. Just as Greeno mentions this, Don Norman in The Design of Everyday Things also references constraints as a valuable tool in user design. Constraints provide failure or curbed action to prompt an additional action that directs the user in a more optimized direction to achieve their objective. As the discussion continues on constraints, the method can be broken down into the interlocking approach or the lock-in approach. Both of these approaches are viable for given contexts and facilitate users through those in-between moments we talked about earlier. To break these constraints methods down, interlocking involves prompting the user to complete interface functions in a specific sequence of events. I recently used an interface that had interlocking qualities. While doing my taxes last week, I used H&R Block. The interface embodied many constraints, showing me an outline of sequence steps that I needed to complete before moving forward to the next page. If I did not fill in a section correctly, the page would prevent me from moving forward to the next step. Furthermore, after learning about script theory in Of Scripts and Prototypes by Kirk St. Amand, I can see the different scenes, roles, props, entry conditions, and exit conditions present in the H&R Block tax filing interface. For example, the overall scene can be understood as filing my taxes using H&R Block. Furthermore, the setting was that I was at my laptop on my kitchen table, using my Wi-Fi to connect to the internet. My computer, W-2 forms, and the H&R Block online application all played an important role. Also, the entry conditions were that I create a website login to access the interface. The exit condition was that I received a confirmation email saying that my taxes had been filed, thus ending the scene. Breaking down interactions through this lens promotes observational learning, thus improving how designers understand their user. Anyways, going back to the two methods of constraints that Norman cites, the other constraint of lock-in is also present in everyday applications. Lock-in means the interface stops a user from prematurely ending the interface experience without achieving their goal. A common example is clicking off an application, such as Microsoft Word. The application will prompt a screen that asks you to either save the document or continue exiting. This function stops users from accidentally not saving their work. I thought this example was interesting, considering I use Google Drive for most of my work. Google Drive automatically saves your work. Likewise, when I click off the web page, I am always surprised no lock-in box pops up. On the contrary, at work I go on many applications that have a lock-in box, even if they don't have any savable material on the application. Overall, I think these readings portray the importance of including motion into user research. Usability includes a large degree of psychological choices, thus presenting the importance of reflecting and conditions of design. Users will use their reflective cognitive thoughts to navigate through an interface. The outcome of this interface journey will either result in positive or negative emotions, depending on their goal and if it was accomplished. Placing strategic methods of content control will situate the user in an optimized position. In connection. This is how cultural context plays into user design. Understanding the culture through in-motion observation allows designers to form interfaces in an optimized context. Designed items should reflect a culture that created them. For example, in my work, there are 2 manuals created for each tool. I design the North American version of the model, which includes the languages of English, French Canadian, and Mexican Spanish. Now, the mere resources inhibit us from creating a separate manual for every language the tool is sold in. However, Team handles the rest of the world products, as they are called. These manuals for the rest of the world are mostly pictures, eliminating the constraints of language barriers. The pictures are carefully created and designed to optimize the comprehensibility of the steps. This is just one example of how cultural contexts drive design choices. Although the user should be the driving force of design, whether that be understanding their psychological approaches or context of their surroundings, designers should always prioritize the user. Thank you, everybody, for joining me this week on our podcast. See you next week.